Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I'm getting ready for a 4-day business thing in New York City, so I'm posting this one a little early this week. It's an annual pharma event where a ton of companies in my space, which are the services for the pharmaceutical industry, blah, 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 rent hospitality suites in the Midtown area. They host meetings day after day after day. There are a couple of receptions, etc. If I showed you what my itinerary looks like this week, you would freak the heck out. Unless you're in the pharma services sector, in which case you'd be like, yeah, Gil, you could probably fit a few more appointments in there, you big slacker. But the thing is, the week culminates in this big black tie dinner where they bring in a celebrity speaker and well, it's a big event. And a few of my member companies have invited me to be a guest at their table. And I've passed on all of those, just saying, I can't attend this year. Without adding, because I still can't cope with sitting in a room of 2,000 people who are not wearing masks. So I'm going to skip the Jerry Seinfeld speech and interview with the head of the organization and just go home early on Thursday. So what I want to tell you is I'm a little frazzled in the very present moment because I'm literally recording this, then working out, finishing packing, and hitting the road. But I got this sort of creative kick in the ass this weekend after watching the 2014 Nick Cave documentary, 20,000 Days on Earth. I'm not a Nick Cave fan. I only know one song of his, the one from the Until the End of the World soundtrack. But it did something to me. I'll try to write about that in this week's Substack, which I hope I get out on time during this crazy business week. But I'm also going to try to sustain this creative spark on this project and not let it die out, as I've done for about 19,000 days so far. I passed 19,000 earlier this year, which means 2.5 years away, I'll be hitting 20,000 days on Earth myself. Anyway, let's get to this week's show. My guest this time is Timothy Goodman, who has a beautiful new graphic memoir out called I Always Think It's Forever, a love story set in Paris as told by an unreliable but earnest narrator. It's from Simon Element, which is a division of Simon & Schuster. Timothy is an artist, designer, muralist, writer, artist, we'll just put it that way. And his new book incorporates all these skills and different modes and more into this story of love and heartbreak centered around a throw caution to the wind year abroad in Paris. And the book it's in a number of different modes, and we talk about using different mediums to tell that single story and what his process was like for, working in a sort of typescript and a handwritten script in his Sharpie graffiti style, breaking out a couple of sort of panel by panel sections and more. It's told in a bunch of different ways, and it tells something really important. I should say, as I always say about any book or experience that describes dating and relationships nowadays, I am incredibly thankful that I am married and off the market, because I couldn't imagine trying to navigate not just the one-to-one dynamic of a relationship, a romantic relationship nowadays, but all the outside stuff, like one another's social media and histories and well, it all just seems so much more complicated than it did when I was in my 30s and met Amy. For Timothy, this book centers on his relationship with a woman he meets in Paris as he's in the midst of what the French call dépaysement, which is loosely translated as change of scenery, but gets at something deeper. As he writes about, it goes along the lines of becoming a stranger in your own life and memory. And the thread of midlife runs through the book without being, like me, an old man. Timothy's, I think, late 30s or just around his 40s. But it's a book that captures those senses of possibilities and what we've already given up and what we still have ahead of us. And while he relives the lush details of falling in love with this woman in Paris, the shadow of the breakup and the resulting depression from it hang over the story. It's told in a few different timelines. It's all easily followable. You just, pick up on the different modes as they're told. But in the process of doing this, he explores a lot more than just, a single relationship. This isn't just some pity party sort of thing. Instead, it really stands in for thoughts on masculinity, toxic and otherwise, and abandonment, depression, his own experiences with this, but what it means to fold outwards into the larger world and see other people and what they're experiencing, and how to transform experience, especially heartbreak, into art. And ultimately, what I think the book does is show a gratitude towards life, even when it hurts. And on top of that, it is this is not just some depressing, dark thing or a pity party, as I said. It is awfully fun to read at times. There are digressions on the NBA and the Golden State Warriors and Kevin Durant. There are passages that lap into a freestyle rap meter without warning you that's what they're about to do. There are segments on other people's key relationship moments, a la When Harry Met Sally in certain ways. And there's so much more within it. And it's just a gorgeous book to behold. It's beautifully designed. The artwork is great. The color choices and the way it's put together just all come together really beautifully and show that this is something made by a real artist and designer working with, the designers at the publisher. But the pages, they really convey plenty about what it means to be alive today and how we're trying to make a connection in a world where we're all hyper-connected, but maybe a little too hyper, I guess. So go check out I Always Think It's Forever. And if you're in a happy and stable relationship, be thankful, but also be kind to other people who aren't. Now, here's Timothy's bio from the book. Timothy Goodman is an award-winning artist, graphic designer, author, and public speaker. His art and words have populated walls, buildings, packaging, shoes, clothing, books, magazine covers, and galleries all over the world for brands such as Apple, Nike, Google, MoMA, Netflix, Tiffany & Co., Samsung, Yves Saint Laurent, Sundance, Uniqlo, Target, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. He regularly partners with not-for-profit organizations and schools to create art for communities in New York. He is the author of Sharpie Art Workshop and the co-creator of several projects, including the viral blog and book 40 Days of Dating. His first solo gallery exhibition, I'm Too Young to Not Set My Life on Fire, was on view in Manhattan in 2021. Timothy's work often discusses mental health, therapy, manhood, race, politics, heartbreak, and love. He teaches at School of Visual Arts, regularly speaks around the world at creative conferences, and enjoys sharing his life on Instagram. He lives in New York City. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Timothy Goodman. When did you feel ready for a memoir? Given that you have an online presence that is sort of memoiristic, but
yeah,
doing this,
yeah. Well, first and foremost, it's It's funny because I started my career as a book jacket designer at Simon and Schuster, and I remember this was in 2007, 2008, which is wild because full circle they are the ones who published my graphic memoir with Simon Adleman. But I remember back then reading this article in the book review, I think, talking about how just kind of like boring it is that nowadays it's seemingly everybody publishes a memoir. And it stuck with it. They were like, there was one line, I'm paraphrasing, something like, people nowadays, they slip on a banana peel on the street and they think they have something to write about. They have a memoir to write. And it's always kind of stuck with me. So, I at first I was a little hesitant to call this a memoir, but I really wanted to create something that I never saw before, this sort of graphic memoir in the form of which is very of today's culture where, we do have short attention spans, and you can literally turn, there's 192 pages of this book, and you can kind of anywhere you turn the page, you can just kind of open it and stumble upon any page, and it's part of a longer comprehensive narrative, but at the same time, whatever page you're on is its own page as well, and is kind of has its own identity. And I kind of wanted to make something that felt, I just had been writing these kind of stories and these poems and these vignettes for many years and posting them on Instagram and, putting them, I'm a muralist, I'm an artist, and I'm putting them on walls and in New York City. And so it just came with this story in Paris, the afterfall of the whole thing, in 2021, when I kind of created this proposal, it just felt like I had been talking about for so long, my own love stories and my own kind of thoughts on trying to wrangle with what love and heartbreak is, and someone who has an attachment disorder like me, and how I deal with heartbreak. I've been writing about these things for so long, and this story that happened in Paris, because of what happened, how I finally showed up for myself, it just became this, I was like, oh, this is a really great kind of background narrative to kind of talk about all these other things, to wrap myself in the context of all these thoughts I have about dating and singlehood and trauma and manhood and, today's dating culture and, dating apps and stuff like that. All these thoughts I've been writing and jotting down for so long, it just felt like this story, this whole thing that happened to me in Paris was just like this perfect kind of vehicle, this catalyst to talk about all these things. And, because so much of all of this is about the way we process the world, based on what happened to us as kids and the way we were showed or not showed love. And I wanted to really go deep with all of that. And so it just felt like,
I get you.
Perfect time for me.
And it's a weird question because, you've got a line in the book about, striving to constantly be in a state of becoming. But what did you learn about yourself in the process of this project?
Well, I learned that I could finally accept the fact that I wasn't going to be able, for someone like me, like I talk about, have an attachment disorder, have what my therapist calls abandonment depression. I fall into the same cycle every breakup. And this time around, I kind of was able to witness, doesn't mean you could stop it, but I was able to kind of witness this happening to me, and finally wanting to go a different route, to be more proactive. I had this teacher when I was in art school. He would always say there's no such thing as a dead end. If you hit a wall, you just turn around and go a different way. And that really stuck with me. And I thought about, what it means to finally show up for myself in a different way that I hadn't done before. And it's not about trying. I still had to go through the heartbreak, the pain, but really diving in and looking at myself in the mirror about why is this cycle happening? Why, you know, is it, kind of, I had never been able to admit my whole life um, that I was abused as a child, and so being able to kind of like free myself of these things um, during this process was, really
Not to,
transformative
I was
in a
going to say,
lot of
not to
ways.
step in for your
Uh,
therapist, but
Shout
do
out
you
to
think it
my
mattered
therapist.
that this relationship took place in that dépaysement, in that resettling of yourself, that it happened somewhere outside of the Timothy context
Hmm.
and environment?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Because I planned to go to Paris, and I go there for 6 months, and um, I'm immersing myself in a culture and trying to, attempting to learn the language, and you don't know anyone there, and you find yourself lost in a really beautiful way. And I think that opens up all sorts of other possibilities and sensibilities that, when you're in your normal kind of environment and routine, wherever you are, you might, you're not
Yeah.
open to these things. I think you're um, closed off in a different way. So yeah, certainly that, I think, opened the door for the good and, the ugly that kind of followed. But it was all
Yeah.
uh,
That reminds
worthwhile,
me a
of
little,
course, and
not
what
that you had
made
the
me
same
think
sort of
so.
adventures, but George Orwell writing about Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer and how beautiful a book it is, but
Hmm.
the fact that it's an American expatriate, Orwell wishes Miller was writing about life in Brooklyn and, what that world was like instead of the shallower roots. But you could argue that the shallower roots were what allowed Miller to go deep in
Hmm.
some ways, that being around the familiar would have made it more difficult for him to
Yeah,
really observe and to relate.
yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's an age-old kind of trope in a way. Like you have to kind of go, you kind of have to lose yourself to find yourself in a lot of ways, and that could take place with travel or all sorts of kind of different adventures that are out of the ordinary. And you have to, at the same time, then you have to come back and find the spectacular in the ordinary as well. But a lot of times, the adventure, the hero's journey allows you to kind of get back to a place to see things differently.
Was it
Of course.
weird writing and making this book and having it come out while you're deep in a relationship with someone else? Okay.
No, not really. Tina, my partner, my girlfriend, she's extraordinary. She's an artist, she's a painter, and she just gets it. She knows that
Sure.
this is. I've been doing these things for a long time. 10 years ago, I did a social experiment called 40 Days of Dating, where me and my best friend kind of created uh, this project to date, to quote unquote
Mm.
date each other as a, it'd always been platonic. Um, and we were both single at the same time. And it's this kind of, you see this in everywhere from Harry Met Sally to, countless other movies about what it, to date your friend or whatever. And so we'd always been curious, and we kind of wanted to learn more about our relationship problems and habits at the time. And we decided to, kind of create this experiment to date each other and have these rules that we had to abide. Like we had to see each other every day for 40 days, and we had to, go on a couples trip together and see a therapist together weekly. And so, and then she and I, and that project was the first one of that kind. Uh, that kind of went very viral. This was in 2013. It was a blog, which is about 100 internets ago. Uh, and, and we wrote a book about that, and we optioned the story as a movie. Nothing has happened thus far with that, but she and I continued to, then we did another elaborate social experiment called 12 Kinds of Kindness, diving into our own apathy and selfishness, and really diving deep. I met my biological father for the first time ever, kind of as a prompt because of one of the steps in that project. And I've done 4 or 5 of these kind of like social experiments through the years. Another one was where me and my friends went on we text therapy, is very kind of in the zeitgeist, or it was more a couple of years ago. And I think we went to the therapist through text therapy, and we documented all our sessions, and kind of created a website, a blog, highlighting that. So I've always been really interested. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just an artist. I'm just a guy interested in what it means to challenge my being, or to dive deeper into what it means to be human, from a more I think layman's point of view, and just kind of, and so I've been doing these things for so long. So anyways, coming back to Tina, she knows that and gets it. And this Paris thing wasn't a social experiment. It was really about me doing something for myself for the first time ever, which is why I went there and really wanted to just take a break. And I never knew that anything would come of it. I'm always writing poems and journaling about the magic of life as it happens. And so, a year and a half later, when I kind of realized like, oh, this could maybe be a book, because obviously what's personal is universal. And I thought a lot of people would connect to it. But Tina's been wonderful. I mean, I think, in some ways there were moments in the very beginning where she was like, we talked about it, of course. And,
oh no, please! People hear enough of me gabbing on this show all the time. I'd much rather the guest did the talking. But I joke about that with general nonfiction writers when they work on a biography for 9 years, and does the spouse start to get angry that you keep bringing it up during dinner? This, it's another thing entirely. So, But tell me about the. Oh, go on. Yeah. No, I was going to say, can you talk a little about the sort of the different modes within the book, the modes of writing and art, and sort of the decision-making process that went into, how you structure it, how you alternate among the different forms that you use within it?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's hard because it's not necessarily a decision. It's just kind of the only way I know how to do things, in this kind of realm of just various mediums to tell one story. So, I like this kind of idea, content, like this love story that's in the background, this kind of constant through line. But then, every page you turn, it pulls you. Suddenly you're in a section where I'm talking about my, heartbreak or my depression. And then suddenly you turn the page and it's like, okay, here's 25 non-cheesy breakup songs, or, okay, here are, all the, these really funny dating app profiles that I came across going on Tinder or whatever. So it keeps pulling you back outside to what's the context of culture in a lot of ways. And I've always been, really obsessed with pop culture in different ways. And I've always been really in love with it. And I'm a huge music fan and kind of multimedia fan. So it's just the way I know how to kind of tell stories, and you see that in various kind of like movies or something where, you take something like a High Fidelity, the movie with John Cusack, or the TV show with Zoe Kravitz that was on Hulu. Like there's a story, and then suddenly, he's walking down the street and he's like, okay, here's the top 5 whatever greatest breakups, or here's the top 5, my top 5 whatever, and it kind of like I like being able to pull an audience member out of the story into something different suddenly, and then kind of throwing you back in. Um, and so, yeah, I just that's just the way I know how to do these things, and it just felt right, kind of telling the story, and even the story, the way I tell it is
Right.
all, the way I write. I mean, there's journal entries in the book that are more written kind of prose, but um, all the stories about the relationship are told as like spoken word poetry. That's very much how I write. I do readings a lot in front of audiences, and so I've just always been really interested in just kind of like what it means to do to layer, have all
Yeah,
these
the
textures to
the
tell a story.
meter of the spoken word thing threw me at the beginning. I was like, why is he writing? And then heard it in my head. I'm like, oh, okay, no, I get it now. That's yes, that's kind of a weird
Oh yeah,
style.
you'd
And
be like,
oh,
why
wait,
is he
wait, that's a
rhyming?
yeah, somebody raised on '90s hip hop, especially. So now, did you have other
Exactly.
memoir models in mind? Like, was there anyone you looked at and said, oh yeah, I'd make a book like this? Or it really sounds as though you were sort of forging your own path when it came to figuring out how to tell this. So,
Well, uh,
yeah.
40 Days of Dating, which I just talked about, which we created 10 years ago. I co-created that with my friend and colleague Jessica Walsh. We we kind of started that in a similar vein. That story, it was writing, it was uh, illustrations to accompany the writing, it was videos. Um, so that was kind of the nucleus. I took it in a different way with this book, but I've always been, kind of interested in doing that. Um, these, just kind of having all these kind of different mediums to tell one story. It's funny. My friend Mari Andrew, who she's written two incredible books. Her first one, I'm Not There Yet, which is a New York Times bestseller. She was, it's funny because her book really, it's very much a graphic memoir in a different way, but she has a lot of charts and stuff like that. Her book really inspired my new book. But
Yeah.
what's funny is that 40 Days of Dating really inspired her in some ways, which I didn't know until later because I didn't know her back then. But um, I think there's nothing new under the sun in a lot of ways. But certainly, you know, some friends like Mari, uh, you see these things, but I've been kind of doing it for a while in
Yeah,
that
I
vein.
get you.
So
It's the, well, it was an old Matt
yeah,
Groening line that copyright infringement is the sincerest form of flattery. But I get the sense that, you have those influences on each other. But tell me, and this is jumping way past the book now, your influences artistically. I mean, there's the obvious Keith Haring thing that everybody will point to when it comes to the mural stuff. But who else,
of course.
did you find sort of infecting you as an artist when you were developing and still developing?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Keith Haring was not just for his, I feel like his art is a massive influence on me. I really tried to make it my own with lettering and words because I come from a graphic design background. And so telling a kind of like a story editorially with my murals, whether it's like a whole thing about all the greatest places to go for in Paris or, New York neighborhoods or whatever. And I've always just really infused type and lettering into my stuff. So I've worked hard to make it my own. But, you know, Barbara Kruger. I do a lot of work with massive kind of letter forms. These kind of like phrases and poems that I write, and I'll do these big murals or pieces with just kind of like wonky lettering that all kind of like
Sure.
puzzle pieces together. And Barbara Kruger is a huge influence. Stuart Davis is a huge influence. Um, Matisse's jazz book, he has these spreads, these pages that are incredible. They're just wall to wall kind of like penmanship. He would just they're just cursive, It's all in French, but he, I just always was really uh, just fascinated with that. So all my work is about becomes this kind of like canvas or wall of discovery. I need to fill up. I'm a very obsessive about filling up um, the entire canvas, uh, every inch of it, and it's very balanced and there's a lot of rhythm to it, and that really comes from my design background as well. Like you learn the rules to break them. Like if I didn't have intensive typography training when I was in design school, I wouldn't be able to kind of really do these things with lettering and words. And so yeah, so those are all my influences in a
Again,
lot of
that's
ways.
always the God damn
I'm
it. Why
sure there's
didn't I
more,
think
but I
of
can't think
X,
right
Y,
now.
or Z? But let me just ask, as somebody who,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
started making art about 2 years ago, and nothing, dramatic by any means, but even the
Mm.
basic act of lettering, how on earth do you get the kerning right? I mean, how much, pre-sketching or whatever you're doing when you're doing the murals or the canvases to actually not end up with, oh, God damn it, I need 3 extra letters that are not going to fit on this.
It's like anything. It's like working out. You just get better and better and better, and it gets a little easier
Yeah.
every time. And it's a 10,000 hour rule. And you know, I always say like, oh, people are like, whoa, it took you 3 hours to do this whole mural or something, or 6 hours to do this 40-foot wall. And it's like, yes, 6 hours and 12 years, 6 hours and 13 years. Um, so it really is just nothing is possible without making time for it. And, you just really get a feel. Uh, it really is just music to me. Like I think of it as freestyling hip hop. I think of it, it's the way I write, it's the way I draw, it's the way I, you know, draw my writing on a wall. It really is just, there's a rhythm and a groove to it that once you understand, you have a kind of a set rule of chord changes, that you're working inside of a, kind of a, you just start to understand like how things will kind of come together as you're doing it. And there's no mistakes, because once you're doing this on a wall and you say, oh, I need to start making the letter form.
Yeah.
You just understand the steps. You're 6 steps ahead. So you even know like, oh, I got to start making the letter forms a little bigger to kind of get to the end and it's a feel. And it's just about, I've always really been good with space, environmental space on a wall, because I was a horrible high school student. I barely graduated, and I started painting houses when I was 17 for several years for this guy, Dave, who was really my life mentor. And we worked in all these really incredible homes in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm from. And I painted houses and hung wallpaper and faux finished, can make walls look like Venetian plaster and stuff like that. So I was doing this all in my late teens or early 20s. And so now, like, years later, I connect the dots. Like when I did my first mural, I was like, of course I was scared and shitless, but it was like, I already kind of understood. There was something just spatially that I kind of the physicality of it going on a wall and just understanding the relationship between space and composition kind of came a
Here's
little
that.
easier for me
This will sound like another
because
weird
of it.
one, but that sense of public facing art as opposed to, we'll say, fine art, something that's on a canvas, ends up on somebody's
Mm-hmm.
wall in their home. You know, is it something you consider in those
Yeah.
terms, that this is something facing out at people and what it means to, well, talk about that idea of public facing art, I guess. That's something I'm interested in terms of especially all the great work you do with the murals, the basketball court, and
Yeah. I
everything
mean,
else.
yeah, I mean, we talk about Keith Haring. I mean, I think he said something like, um, I always just thought, after all, like if art isn't for community, if it isn't contributing to culture, then what else is it for? And I've always really kind of subscribed to that idea. Um, and so the public facing aspect of it is just par for the course for me. Um, I want to make art. I want art to be accessible, whether that's on a $15 t-shirt, or, you know, on a wall mural in New York City that contributes to the landscape of a neighborhood, or a basketball court. You know, I did that basketball court with Kevin Durant's charity foundation for the students at 315 in Brooklyn. And, you know, I walk away and that basketball court, that art is no longer mine. It's the kids. They have ownership and authorship of that court. You know, first of all, because I did two workshops with them before I did the art on the court. And they, you know, inspired me. They told me what they wanted me to draw on the court. So content wise, it's theirs. Then I walk away and they're the ones left to own it. And they get to tell people that they have the dopest basketball court that you've ever seen. And so there's a sense of ownership over that. And I think that's where art really can kind of, I think, be at its best, is that community aspect. And I do a lot of, like, you know, I donate murals to schools and to pro bono organizations all the time, because, you know, I just think that, again, that, you know, it's funny. I'll do these, sometimes I'll do kind of rogue street art and murals, and there's always someone, like, you know, some old lady, you know, I'm like doing this mural at like 6:30 in the morning or something. This lady will come up to me and give me like a $10 bill. She's like, "Thank you so much for contributing to the street. You know, like, I love this." So it's always like this really human moment. And that's what it's about for me. And there's a showmanship to it too. You know, I draw live at events, and I just doing murals on the street. People are taking pictures and taking videos. And I just, you know, I want to connect to humans, and that's what my book is about. You know, I want to connect to other lonely people. You know, I think sharing your stories is a sort of activism, because you connect to other lonely people in the world. And I think that, like, if I'm not doing it,
I was struck by
what am I doing it for?
Within the book, it's a notion, it's something I've gone through my whole life. Also, that sense of finding yourself in another, but you sort of invert that into finding yourself in the absence of the other. That you have to look around and see what's left after this monumental breakup, and you know, you see different aspects of yourself that, you know, again, you were out of your own context and starting to see something different, which I think everybody can benefit from, that sort of example, or that notion of stepping back and, you know, thinking about the thing you wanted versus, you know, who you really were in the midst of it. That's just me sort of prattling on about relationship stuff. Sorry, I've been happily married for 17 years now. So.
No, I mean, you know, it's true. I mean, I think you can just get closer to understanding what you want, what kind of person you want, who you are in the face of it, who you need to be. You know, I think so many people forget that you need to also kind of be the person you want in a lot of ways. You know, how are you showing up to this? Like, what are your downfalls? Like, what are you, you know, and what kind of insecurities and traumas are you still kind of working through? But yeah, I talk about in the book something like I'm left in the debris of, like, Adele's songs "Hell," and it's like that's a breakup, you know. Like, you find yourself in the grocery store, you know, and that horrible cheesy breakup song that's playing in the background of CBS, and it's like making you, you know, teary eyed. It's a rough road, you know. You got to go through it. It puts me in mind
of everything in my life relates back to an earlier podcast, recording with Milton Glaser and going over the front step of his building, and it has that painted mural or painted lettering over the transom that just says "Art is work." That you know, I realize there's a lot of meanings behind what goes into that.
Yeah,
work.
Art. What is it?
Yeah,
Art
I was
is
a
what?
picture of it because, of course, the moment I was there, I thought, "Oh, holy crap! I'm at Milton Glaser's studio. I gotta, you know, get a picture of this before I go in." So, you know, because the show, well, just like with you, the except for me, this is not my full-time job. You find yourself in scenarios you couldn't have imagined in your day-to-day life that, again, with you,
Mm-hmm.
from some of the stories you relate in the book, as well as things I've seen through your online presence, I'm sure 17-year-old Tim in Cleveland was not envisioning this life for himself, or yeah.
Oh, I mean, are you kidding me? Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, 17-year-old Tim was just, like I said, I barely graduated high school. I had a 1.7 GPA. I was, it's funny. I was just on a call this past week with the mayor of my old town where I went to high school at. And because they want me to do like a public like art installation, and this summer, and I told her, I said, you don't have any idea, like the high school version of me would never dream in a million years that I'd be on the call with the mayor. She wants to, like, you want to talk to me and hire me or like have me come and contribute. I was like, I was a nuisance to the community, and now, like, so kind of made a joke that, like, what goes around comes around. First, you destroy the
You didn't
community,
set
and
too
then
many
you come back
fires
and
when
build
you
it
were
back
young.
up. So, it's like, I was like, getting a, yeah, I was, in my late teens, I was getting arrested, and I was doing every drug under the sun. I just really had no direction, and thank God I started painting homes for that guy, because he really steered me into the right direction. I learned a lot about what it means to build it for a future, and to have work ethic, and to dream, and and that's where a lot of that came from, and where I decided, I wanted to go to art school at the age of 23 and move to, ridiculously expensive, you know, city like New York City, and with no money, and apply to 100 scholarships and win 10 of them, and go to SVA, and so I was hauling, buckets of wallpaper glue upstairs for 15 hours a day in my late teens and early 20s. I don't take any of this for granted. Um, every day is really, I can't, I still, I just had I had a Nike shoe come out 2 months ago.
Yeah.
It's with Kevin Durant, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, called the Timothy Goodman KD15. Yeah. Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is not, like,
I should ask before we get to everything else.
I don't take this shit for
your
granted.
favorite NBA team of all time? Yeah. And I mean, like, favorite season and team, not just, are you a Knick guy or a Net guy or something? You'd think, right? And I was a Knick guy and hated that Bulls when I was young, but still,
yeah, you think.
You look at it, it's like, this is the greatest team you'll ever see.
Yeah. Ever. I mean, the
ones that lost before Durant got there, or the ones the season after? Yeah.
73. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the ones that went 73-9. The year they lost to LeBron. Well, I'm from Cleveland too, but that team was incredibly exciting. I liked
at that point it was sort of
Durant.
like
the Durant year was great, but like they had Durant. It was over. But the fact that they lost to LeBron, like, just
for me, it's at the end of Game 7 incredible. Where you get Kyrie's 3, LeBron's chase down and block, and then Kevin Love stuck on an island trying to guard Curry, out beyond 3, and somehow missing the shot. And I was like, all 3 of them. And Kevin Love was the one who had the most desperation, and somehow they all came through. Yeah. But when you mentioned incredible. The idea of, who you were in those Cleveland days and everything, what did New York mean to you before you got here? And how did that change over the 20 years or so?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really always felt like I belonged here. It's an interesting thing to feel like, and I just really I just always felt through just whatever, like, could be a TV show, a movie, the music, everything. I just knew about it. I read about it. I've asked people who had gone. My grandmother had come here many times. I didn't ever come here. I didn't come to New York until I was 21, I think. It just always, so when I came here, it was the moment I literally went over the bridge and drove in. I just felt like, this is it. Like, this is where I want to be. It just, everything felt, I liked the hope, the promise. I liked the challenge. I like the desperation, the urgency of the whole city. I like the energy, the spirit of the people. Everyone is funny in New York, you know, like, and there's just, it just felt, you know, some things just kind of swim your stream. And uh, so I never felt like, once I really kind of had more direction in Cleveland, I just didn't feel like I belonged there. You know, and sometimes, as my fave Bob Dylan would say, you know, sometimes you're born to the wrong
Mm-hmm.
parents. Sometimes you're born in the wrong city. Some, you know, like sometimes you're born with the wrong name, and you just, you know, you work to find your way home. Uh, and so,
To
you know,
veer into the
19 years later,
worst
now I'm still
territory,
here.
what was your vision of Paris before that trip? Yeah.
Well, I had been to Paris a couple times for work. Loved it. Always wanted to spend time there, more time there, and so that's why I, there was no question. I just wanted to go to Paris. You know, I'm a romantic. I still romanticize the hell out of New York every day. Even though I've been here for almost 20 years, you know, like I'm always taking pictures. It always feels like, you know, some new street maybe I haven't been on in a long time or seen. Like it always just feels like a movie. I'm like that. I'm like that everywhere I go. You know, I'm blessed and privileged to travel the world for my job. I could be
Hmm.
in anywhere from Dubai to Philadelphia to, you know, um, to Utah. You know, I went to Tulsa for the first time a couple months ago. I loved it. Like I'm always just kind of like a big admirer of whatever culture I'm in, and I want to kind of like feel it and learn about it. And so Paris, you know, it lived up to the hype for me. It was an incredible romantic journey. Um, and you know, I always kind of, what did they say? We'll always have Paris. Um, you know,
Hmm.
it's always going to kind of live in my mind as some sort
And
of
willingness.
dream, despite what
Yeah, I was going
happens.
to
It
ask.
doesn't matter.
Paris sounded like you could go back.
Rome,
Rome
though,
does not
Rome
sound
is a
like you
different
ever want to
story
set
because that's
foot
where the
in.
thing. No, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, Rome. That was difficult, you know, to you know, not to put too much of a spoiler for anyone who wants to read the book, but you know, the part two of the book opens up in Rome, where you know my uh, at the time girlfriend and I break up after being there for uh, you know 36 hours or something. So and I was kind of left to she flew back to Paris and my flight because it was New Year's or the day or two before New Year's, like my flight was like $1 million to fly back. So I stayed in Rome at the Airbnb that I got for the rest of the week, and I got incredibly sick with the flu. I was incredibly heartbroken, and as I say, you know, in the book, there's nothing like eating the best cacio e pepe you've ever had and sneezing and crying into
I'll
it for
also
three
note
days.
that
So
all of this is the end of 2019 into 2020. So, yeah, I mean, it's just
yeah, I don't. Yeah,
the emotional tumult you're going through ends up coinciding with the end of the world as we knew it, which, you know, isn't a subject within the book itself, but, you know, how did that affect, how was your pandemic, I guess is the way of putting it. You know, how did that affect what you do and who you are?
yeah, yeah. You know,
Yeah.
I purposely didn't kind of talk about the pandemic in the book because
Yeah,
I
no,
just
it
wanted
works
it to
very well doing
feel
it that way,
timeless. I didn't
because
want
otherwise you would have
because
brought
it
in a whole
had
freight
nothing to
of
do.
context that,
Yeah,
yeah, makes it too, yeah.
yeah, and it had nothing to do. It just didn't do. Yes, I was incredibly heartbroken in the beginning of the pandemic. You know, like I was still kind of reeling from all of that, and it was not easy. Yeah, it was the first month or month and a half. You know, but in some ways, you know, I was traveling a lot at that time for work, and there's nothing worse than feeling that way and having to put on a smile all the time. Um, you know, I just got back. I was in North Carolina. I was doing a big mural for ESPN
Hmm.
uh, for the Duke North Carolina rivalry, and I was doing this big mural, and I was being filmed, and I had to meet all these clients and all these people, and
Yeah.
you know, just internally, I was I was suffering, and so I was actually quite relieved to not have to like put on a smile um, for in the beginning and kind of just like live in my dread and my heartbreak in the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I was grateful for that, in that sense.
I'm sure. I mean, you
But
come
yeah,
off as
it was
somebody who is very
difficult.
social or very much needs, interaction. So I could imagine the double edged sword of that with,
Yeah, yeah. My therapist says I'm an external processor, um, and it's very much part of my makeup. But at the same time, I'm a Cancer son. I love my me time. There's nothing, I don't even want to go on vacation. Like, just let me just be in my house alone for 3 days and not talk to anybody and not literally not leave the house and just like I need to like shut down and recharge. That's so sacred to me. So I'm not, while I'm very social and I'm an extrovert, I'm also like I truly need
yeah, it's
that as well.
again, that's a balancing act. And
Yeah.
as we've seen, 192 pages about relationships and relationship building. That's something again, you have to balance in this and that aspect of life, I suppose. But
Hmm.
I I had this question
Yeah.
that had been, well, I've been wondering since, starting to read your work and, looking back at all the work you've done over the years. Did you have a Excalibur moment with discovering the Sharpie? Was there a moment of this is my tool? That sense of, yeah.
Uh, yeah. Yeah, the first mural I ever did, which was in 2010, I had a full time job, or I was working for a man named Brian Collins in New York City. I was just a couple of years out of design school, so I was working in branding, and I just took a job to work for Apple. I was going to move to San Francisco uh, and work for Apple in Cupertino, and there was like a 2 month period between jobs. I was still working for Brian for his branding agency, Collins. Um, and I was leaving in 2 months to go out to San Francisco. So I got this opportunity to do a mural for the Ace Hotel in New York City to draw on one of their walls in a hotel room. And it was because of I won this Young Guns award for the Art Directors Club, and they kind of were tapping people to see if they were interested. I think they asked 3 artists, 3 designers, uh, which is a whole other story because I did it for free, and there's a big kind of
Mm.
argument or dilemma about what the fact that we should be, and I'm totally on board with that we shouldn't, people shouldn't be asking designers or artists to do work for free but I was in a privileged position to have a full time job, and it felt like something I could take uh, advantage of. Potentially, this could be a way to get something in my portfolio that I had never done before. That could, I'd always really had this dream of working for myself. I didn't feel like I was a corporate person. I didn't want to work for agencies the rest of my life. I really was, it was really important for me to find my voice and express myself. So I was doing a lot of like editorial illustrations back then, and I was really, Miles Davis says this quote like, "You need to play a long time before you can play like yourself," and that was me back then. I was just trying anything, and so when they asked me to do this wall, I really jumped on it, and so it wasn't. I did this sketch. I wanted to draw. It was just more about an idea. I wanted to draw all my favorite things about New York, like a great museum, or here's a place to get a burger, or here's these really great bars. I wanted to make this editorial wall where the common tourist who's staying in this hotel room, they could really use it as like an information guide. um, and so that was the idea, and so I had to figure out how I was going to do that because I'd never done a wall mural. So my friend told me about paint markers. My friend Brian Ray is an incredible artist, and he's done a lot of murals over the years. And it just seemed like the quickest, easiest way. That's why I decided to do it. I just didn't know. I didn't want to. I knew even then that I don't like to labor, and I think artists of all kinds really need to tap into their behaviors, and figure out like I'm an impatient person, so it drove my style. I didn't want to labor. I don't want to be on the paintbrush and like whatever. Like I just want to get it out. And so the paint marker, when I was practicing with it, it felt like, oh, this really immediate way to do this mural. I can do it. So I chose that, and I locked myself in this hotel room for 3 days. And I was crying during it because I just have never done anything like that before. It was physically, emotionally, and spiritually stimulating. And I walked out of that, I did that, and I didn't know if I liked it or not, but it felt special. And I think that's a really great place, a rich place to be in, where you're kind of like working on something that you don't know if you like yet. You're really scared to kind of share with people, like, and that's such an interesting, rich territory. And I came out of that, and I just felt so stimulated. And I asked myself an important question. I said, how do I make this feeling continue for the rest of my life with my work? And I went to my day job, and then I moved to San Francisco and worked for Apple for a year. And then during that process, I did another mural. But I also this was in 2010, but when I did that mural, I really took it upon myself to try to promote the hell out of it on social media at the time. I would emailing people about it. I was trying to get on design blogs. I felt like that was also part of of what I needed to do. And I still do that. I'm constantly like letting people know I'm alive and sharing my work. And so that led to another mural, like 8 months later. And then I was at Apple for a year. I quit because I realized I was doing enough freelance to at least pay my rent. And that's all I needed to know to move back to New York. And I did another mural a year later. They trickled in slowly. The first 3 years, I did maybe just 3 or 4 murals. And then at some point, kind of like the floodgates opened, and I kept going. But that was it. It felt like I kind of tapped into something that wasn't being done.
Did you? You mentioned getting better and learning how to do this. Besides Brian's advice with the paint marker, did you have to? I don't want to say study, but did you ask questions? Did you start figuring out? Oh, if I do this, this is going to either save time or et cetera. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, listen, I look at my early murals and work with
yeah, but beyond the practice part of it, did you have to actively reach out to people I'm trying to figure out how to do X.
No, not so much with the paint marker, because there's only.
I just mean with mural design and creation in general. But yeah.
Pony in the sense. Oh, sure. I mean, there's many different processes I go through with murals depending on what I'm doing. With the paint marker thing, a lot of times I freestyle, just literally. I never do a sketch. If I'm doing a wall mural, if I'm doing it like on my iPad, I kind of, I work with the client. I'm working with a set of a list of objects and words or phrases that we want to get on the wall. So I obviously need to keep that in mind. But when I'm doing like these big wonky text murals, for instance, I do a full sketch. I usually project it, trace it with chalk. I have assistants, and then and then I have to improvise because there's always issues with the wall that you can't account for on a sketch. So, and then I paint it in usually with wall paint. So, I've had to learn these things, different, things through the years that make my life easier with these murals, or quicker, or just better quality. That just, I don't know if I've I think it's just with other friends, we're always, if it's like a new, when I did this basketball court, I talked to my good friend Chantal Martin, who's an incredible artist. Like, she had done a basketball court years before. So, and so I have that kind of community where I can be like, oh, okay, should I do this? Or what kind of paint should I have the people paint it with first? Or like, should we seal it? Like what kind of, should I use a big paint marker, or should I try to do spray paint? Like, What's the best thing that's going to hold up and be durable?
Also,
So yeah, you certainly have those conversations.
You mentioned working with assistants. How difficult was that for you, just in terms of like being able to communicate what you need and to manage, art as management as opposed to, art as artist, I guess. Good.
Yeah. It's not too difficult for me. I don't think so. I think, it's always, I never really struggle with that too much. I know what I want, and I also know how to be nice to people and, compensate them and work, have an enjoyable time. And but it's just about knowing what you need and what you want, with assistance. And I've had, for my book, for instance, I had a lot of help in the last month or two. Like I had my intern Anjali, she's been doing all these animations based on my book, and I kind of art directing her, and people helping me with the events that I've been doing and stuff like that.
Other forms or media you want to try?
Honestly, I would love to. I've been joking, but I'm kind of quite serious. I want to record an album with my friends who are jazz musicians, keyboard and saxophone. We just did an event here in New York City for a book party, launch party, a couple weeks ago when the book came out. I had a big party at an event space, and I really wanted to make a variety show. I really wanted to capture this book because it is so texturalized. Like I wanted to make an event that kind of captured what the book was. And so this event had, I had the art hanging up all over the walls, all these big canvases. I had neon signs made. I had my jazz performers. They're performing, they're playing. We had pizza. We had cakes of the book. I had a mime performing. We were obviously selling books. We were selling merch. And then I did a performance, a half-hour performance with the jazz guys, where I did, and it goes back to that spoken word, the way I write, it goes wonderful. So we did rehearsals with the kind of tone and songs that we would do. But I performed. I did a reading from the book in different sections of the book that went with these musicians who were playing, and it was brilliant. It was incredible. And so I want to make an album with them. Jack Kerouac used to do that. He made albums, him reciting his poetry to piano. I want to kind of take it.
I do have two terrible last questions for you. So one of which I should have warned you about. But the first one, you mentioned the dating, the 40 days of dating project getting optioned. Anybody you imagined playing you in a TV or movie? Yeah.
People always ask that.
Nice.
I'll take the other Timothy.
I was going to go with the guy who plays Thor, but whatever. That's cool too. The last question, which I really should have warned you about, and I apologize for not doing so. What are you reading, or who are you reading? Yeah, or recently, or what book knocked you out in recent months?
So, it's funny. I think, did we talk about it? But I actually, my friend just gave me it's not really a book, but it's in book form.
Oh, yeah.
Before, the Before trilogy, Before Sunset, Before Sunrise. My friend, she just gave me a signed copy from the director of it's like in book form of the script of the first two movies. Yeah. And it's fucking wonderful. I love those movies so much. So I've been reading that, even though I've seen the movies a million times. I've been reading that. I haven't been reading a lot recently because this book launch. But I was reading Sula by Toni Morrison. I was reading my good friend Jeanette McCurdy's brand new memoir, I'm not sure if you're familiar.
Yeah, that's what I'm familiar with. I haven't actually read it, but I've seen that and laughed heartily over the title.
And what else was I kind of reading and dabbling in?
Yeah.
Kind of always, there's always like a stack of books next to my.
And that's why I usually tell people beforehand so they don't draw a blank on this one. But those are all some pretty good recommendations. Actually, I should ask the real last question.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the Nets post Durant and Kyrie?
Well, you know, it's funny. Like, I root for the Nets because I'm a New York person, but I've always been a Knicks fan since I moved here. The Knicks, you know, there's nothing more. And I think you asked me earlier, I didn't answer, but what was my relationship to New York? Like, you know, growing up watching the Knicks in the 90s, they were always on.
Oh, yeah, the NBC games. Yeah.
Like the Sunday game, the NBC game. And they were always, because those teams were incredible, the Patrick Ewing, Charles Oakley years. And it just, you would watch those games and Marv Albert calling the game and Madison Square Garden and Spike Lee. And like, it was just magic, you know, and like, you still like that, even though the teams generally are not good. I started rooting for them when they were winning like 28 games with Nate Robinson. And so, but the Nets, you know, it sucks, man. I'm just,
I was a Nets fan from the New Jersey days. I was always a Knicks guy. Yeah. I bailed on the Knicks in the 90s when they let me down too often. And I thought, why don't I cheer for the Nets? Because I know they're going to be terrible. They're not going to let me down in the conference finals to the Heat. They're just going to win 32 games and lose 50, and that'll be fine. Then they traded for Jason Kidd, and I ended up getting dragged to the finals again. But yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I literally, the summer they traded for Kidd, they offered me 21 games, lower deck, $25 a ticket out of the Meadowlands. Yeah. So my pal and I went in, we bought 2.
What?
And we're saying, maybe there'll be a 500 team this year. They got Jason Kidd, and all of a sudden they're running over the NBA, and we were just like, what's happening? When you're used to a team being crappy and they're good, you know, it's nothing like the Garden when things really get rolling. But yeah, no, I was a Knicks fan in those years. I've met Oakley, and unfortunately I met Charles Smith. You know, I've you feel bad for people, but you know. But yeah, this current iteration of the Nets, I feel kind of. Yeah, you know, I'll watch them, and now I'm sort of interested in what do you do when everybody's a supporting guy? You know, it's kind of interesting to see, but yeah, it's
yeah. They still just don't have I think it's going to take. I think it's like because of the young generation. Once the young generation in Brooklyn and New York grows up, then they'll really feel like they have a bigger fan base.
Yeah, I've never been to Barclay. Like I've driven by it, but I've never actually attended a game. So maybe at some point down the line, if they make the playoffs someday, you and I will go see a game together or something.
Hey, I'm down. I'm going in 2 weeks. I'm
sure Durant did not consult with you before the Phoenix trade, but I know. I felt terrible, but I want to thank you for coming on and for I'll just say the honesty that went into this book. Like I said, I've been in a stable relationship for almost 20 years now, but seeing what that's like, not just the relationship aspect, but the human side of things that you relate, that sense of how we become and how we overcome things in our life. I think you do a remarkable job in this book, and to do it in so many different modes and ways of telling it. It's it really is something. So.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.
And that was Timothy Goodman. His new book is I Always Think It's Forever from Simon Element. And it really is a neat exploration of love, anxiety, art, masculinity, as we said, and possibility. And you should check out Timothy's website, tgoodman.com, TGOODMAN, for more about his art, design, writing, appearances, and a bazillion projects he's involved in, like a lot of those nonprofits we talked about. He's on Instagram, where he likes to share his life, at Timothy Goodman, all one word, and he posts a lot of fun videos and stuff there. He's also on Twitter as Timothy O. Goodman, all one word, but doesn't post as much on that platform, which is for the best. There'll be links to all of this in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast out there with interesting conversations with people every week, and also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or art exhibition or theater or whatever you think I should check out and turn listeners on to. You can do that by writing me. Send me an email, send me a DM, postcard. I love postcards, or a letter, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you're going to go longer than that and you get cut off, just call back and leave another message. And let me know if it would be cool to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might say something interesting that would be great for the listeners to hear, but I would never put something in like that without the speaker's permission. So let me know. If you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. You know, I work plenty for my day job. I get treated pretty well. My expenses for the show are pretty minimal, all things considered. So if you have money to spare, give it to people or institutions in need. You can find individuals through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, and other crowdfunding platforms. And there'll be people you find who need help with rent or medical bills or veterinary bills or getting an artistic project off the ground or something else. Just, there's plenty out there that you can help people with. When it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank every month. You can give to the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Planned Parenthood, and Women's Choice Funds. I make targeted election contributions because that's part of my day job, but it also is kind of meaningful to the elected officials when they if you give them some money, they listen to you more, depending on what district you're in and what your issues are. This is my lobbyist advice for you. But there are a lot of other things you can do if you've got a little bit of time or money to spare that can help us build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY, the number 4, TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.